Welcome, and in context, I hope you had a beautiful Rosh Hashanah. Welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
And we'll go right into the...
Rabbi, you muted yourself or something. We can't hear you.
You can't hear me now?
Now we can.
Yeah.
I changed to my microphone. I have you can see I have a headset on.
Uh-huh.
I changed to that. That way you get less ambient sounds coming across from
Okay.
the highway and everything.
Fewer, yes.
So yeah, that's what happened. It was that split second, Lauren, that you caught.
Okay.
Good for you.
Well, your mouth was moving.
as when doesn't it, right? Okay. So verse 8, Vashem hu holech lefanecha. So I think in this case, and perhaps would make sense, although he did say before, yes, okay, that before this, he had told them that God had told him he could not cross over the Jordan. But I think so. I think I'm comfortable with and, because sometimes va can mean but, right? So and Hashem, he is the one. But it feels better to say, but Hashem, he is the one, right? Who? Haholech lefanecha, who goes before you. Hu yeh imach, he will be with you. Lo yarpacha, he won't let go of you. Velo ya'azveka, and he will not leave you. So the reason why I said let go is this word is from rifayon, okay, or rafeh, which means weak. So in other words, he will always, be there for you. He's not going to be weak. And this is
Now I remember we did do this one because I was noticing the connection with healing.
That's right. There was that wonderful connection, right? Very nice. Lo tira, do not be fearful and do not be dismayed. Velo techat. They're essentially synonyms, you follow me, but they probably have some different connotations. So going on. Vayichtov Moshe et haTorah hazot. Moses wrote this Torah. Vayitna el haKohanim v'nei Levi. He gave it to the priests, sons of Levi. Anosim et Aaron Brit Hashem, who carried the ark of God's covenant, the Lord's covenant, ve'el kol ziknei Israel, and to all the elders of Israel. So that's could raise some questions as to how he did. So whether he wrote one Sefer Torah, did he write more than one Sefer Torah? It does say HaTorah Hazot, which means this Torah, which could refer to the contents of the Torah, right? So let's see.
What about the oral Torah?
So you can't, okay, so he did not write down the oral Torah, because had it been the oral Torah, of course, it wouldn't have been oral anymore. But that's a good question, Harlan. And the truth is that we had read elsewhere or mentioned elsewhere how Moses had simultaneously gotten the oral Torah along with the written Torah. And it's only because this says Vayichtov, right? It says explicitly that Moses wrote it. Okay, if it hadn't said that, you could have been right. But Moses actually did teach the oral Torah. In fact, there's a beautiful description of how he taught it first to, I think, Aaron's sons, and then the elders, and then, that there was a whole process so that Aaron had heard it like 3 or 4 times, and his sons had heard it one less time, etc., etc. So the oral tradition remained oral, essentially. It was like forbidden to write it down up until the time of Yehuda Hanasi, which was the 2nd century of this era, when Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, as an emergency measure, if you're not aware of this is good to know, as an emergency measure, wrote it down in the Mishnah. So they essentially, because Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi was concerned that the oral Torah would be forgotten, because the Romans had forbidden the study of Torah. They'd actually said it was forbidden. And you notice, of course, later on, basically within this century, you had the book burnings, the burnings of the Talmud, many times. Certainly two or three times that I can think of, but probably more than that. But the Nazis definitely burned Gemaras and things like that. They tried to expunge this Torah. So it's interesting, right? It's basically a theme of human rebellion against God, against the divine sovereign, and again the lack of appreciation that just underscores. At any rate, here he goes. Okay, Vayichtov Moshe v'gomer vayitna. So Moses wrote, etc., and he gave it. Keshegamra kula. Okay. When he completed it entirely, when he completed it in its entirety, kula, its entirety, natna livnei shivto, he gave it to the members of his tribe. Okay. So
why do you give it to the people themselves? They should know it too.
well, it was the responsibility of the Levites to then entrust it to the Jewish people, to the Israelites.
Oh.
But remember, the Levites had the time to do that. They had, and that's why they were obligated to do it. The other piece too, Harlan, might be, and again, your questions are really great questions. Remember the reason why the tribe of Levi was selected in place of the firstborn males? Do you remember?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they had shown their loyalty, and possibly that might be another reason why they were entrusted with the Torah, because they could be trusted with it. Okay.
Yeah.
So nice. I would not have thought of that if you had not asked your question. I'm just telling you. Thank you. Let's keep going. Vaitzav Moshe otam lemor. Moses commanded them, saying, Miketz sheva shanim, at the end of 7 years, b'moed, at the moed would be like the gathering, the appointed time. At the appointed time, Shnat Hashmita, the year of the Shemitah, right? We know that would have been the 7th year, right? Look at this. B'chag HaSukkot, to be quite explicit, right? The festival of Sukkot. So,
I don't understand that. We have readings of the Torah on Monday and Thursday and Saturday
yes.
evening.
Yes.
Why 7 years? I don't get it.
Just hold on a second. Okay. We could understand, Harlan, we could understand this as saying at least a minimal, okay? It was actually Ezra, much later on, Ezra, who enacted the readings that we do on Monday and Thursday. I'm not certain about Saturday night, okay? I imagine the weekly Torah portion were also fairly early. The reason why Ezra determined the Mondays and Thursdays is they were market days, and people from small villages would come to the towns to sell their produce. And the courts were also set up to meet on Mondays and Thursdays. And at the same time, they had the public reading of the Torah on those days. So Saturday, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I probably know the answer to this, but it's not in my brain right now. Who divided up the Parshiot?
So I'm pretty certain it was what we'd call them the Masoretes, the Masoretes. So those in charge of the Masorah, and I think they really are identical with the Tanaim and possibly the scribes. Okay.
So approximately,
I believe this would all be sub-Ezra from the time of Ezra on.
Okay. So and it's okay. That makes sense, actually.
Yeah, no. It's also very important. So there's a very, you'll excuse me, pregnant verse found in the Talmud. I don't have the reference for you, that essentially said, had Moses not received the Torah, Ezra would have received the Torah. Okay. And I think that's significant for this reason. I think it is a code way of saying, right, that Ezra organized things, because we know from the book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah that and from tradition that Ezra had this group called the Men of the Great Assembly. And I theorize, it's not me originally, I think there are others who said this long before I did, that the the way in which we have the Torah now, the form that the Torah takes for us in the Torah scroll, is a product of Ezra. Not that he composed it at all. He didn't make it up. That isn't what this is saying. But that he took earlier sources and combined them and made sense of them to create the Torah as we currently have it. Okay? And he also instituted the public readings of the Torah, so that he did an incredible, and by the way, more than that, Judaism as it basically is understood today, all right, is essentially what Ezra and his scholars, the men of the Great Assembly, created. And when I say created, I want to be careful, because it wasn't creatio ex nihilo. What they did was they studied and learned, and they knew, they had an encyclopedic knowledge of the Israelite religion. I'll call it the Israelite religion, which is the religion such as it is in the Bible, okay? And they were able to extract what we have today, because what we practice today, across the board, Orthodoxy and even through Reform, okay, is basically Pharisaism. That's what we practice. And I think that's important to know, even though we feel that it is an authentic expression of what happened, at Sinai, and basically the relationship that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had with Hashem, that it is an authentic expression. But I think it's good to have a little bit more of a understanding of where we stand today. But if you think about it, Ezra lived about the circa 500 BCE, right? Around there, or let's say in the 400s BCE. And what he was able to do with the men of the Great Assembly, and create the scribes, they were known at the time, basically has lost it up to now. It's unbelievable. Okay, I mean, if that's any indication of authenticity, then I don't know what is, if that isn't. But that's, and I think that explains this verse that I just mentioned, right? The statement.
Just a question, and maybe it's another day's, but if it's 500 BCE, that's about 2,500, 2,600 years ago.
I know.
What happened before that, though, right? Because our calendar is 5,000. So
Right.
There's 2,200 years prior to that. Then
Okay.
What was done prior to that?
Well, there were certain institutions that he created, like the prayer book, the beginnings of what we have as the prayer book. But they would have had the laws of the Torah. Okay. He didn't create those laws of the Torah. They were
Right.
there. The question that we might ask is, were they as formally instituted as we have today?
Yep.
That's the question.
Yep.
Right? But and I think it was that formal institution that allowed it to survive. These people had to be brilliant.
Yeah. No.
I'd call them God-inspired.
Yeah.
But you had the prophets. I mean, the prophets talk about Shabbat. I don't think there's any question. If you look at the 10 Commandments, right, you find the foundations of the faith. And Shabbat is mentioned there. So there were, if you think about, the mitzvot aren't only about ritual things. And the ritual essentially was taken care of in the temple, right? That's where the ritual was practiced. But there were laws of purity. I mean, those all existed back then. Okay? So, but what we have today, essentially, and the way it's practiced, because we don't have a temple anymore. And that affects things. But the laws of morality, all there, thou shalt not steal, etc., just weights and just measures, these all would be instituted, and they certainly had courts of law. I'm sure of that. It's just like I said, the Shulchan Aruch wasn't back there.
Got it. Okay.
Right?
That helps. Thank you.
I appreciate you asking the question, David, because your questions are goads, and they prompt me to start thinking about, trying to organize what pieces of knowledge I have, to try and organize them to be able to give you a response, hopefully that makes sense and that's helpful. So you're helping me too.
Okay.
All right. Well, it's important to know this is the process. That's why it's so important to study Torah with other people. Okay. So here we go. Let's see. Yeah, we did this entire verse.
We have a Rashi.
So yeah, right here, right? But Miketz Sheva Shanim, at the end of 7 years, Bishana Rishona Shel Shmita. So what happens then? He says, in the first year of the Shemitah, in other words, of the Shemitah cycle is what he's referring to here, not the Shemitah year, right? In the first year of the Shemitah cycle, Shehi Shana Hashminit. Rashi clarifies that for us, right? Which would be the 8th year, right? Velama Kore Ota Shanat Hashmitah. And why is the Torah calling it the year of the Shemitah? She'adayin shvi'it noheget ba, because the truth is that even into that first year of the next cycle, there are elements of the Shemitah year that are still applying. But Katsir, here he goes, he defines what we're talking about. In the harvesting, Bakatsir, shel shvi'it, in the harvesting of whatever grew in the 7th year, how you would say that grew, that came out, right, that emerged, the motzei shvi'it, as the shvi'it year came to an end, right? I mean, we know that growth is something that takes time, right? So if it started in the Shemitah year and continued to sprout and grow and develop and actually ripen in the first year of the next year, it still had to be treated like Shemitah produce, okay, which means ownerless. Going on, let me just open this up a little bit more. I don't know if that helps you. So he says, "Bavo chol Yisrael leiraot epnei Hashem Elokecha." When all of Israel comes to see the presence, right, or to be seen. Leiraot is more of a passive voice, right? But on the other hand, this et makes it a transitive verb. So sometimes the word et means with, interestingly enough, but leiraot means to be seen. When all of Israel comes to be seen, et pnei the presence of the Lord your God, b'makom asher yivchar, in the place which he will choose, tikra et Torah hazot, you shall read this Torah, neged kol Yisrael, before, right, in the presence of all of Israel, but oznehem, in their ears. In other words, out loud, you should read this Torah. And I feel like, okay, so we know that there was actually a 7-year cycle, which was, I believe, was sort of the triennial cycle. That was the way in which that the whole Torah got read in 3 years, sequentially. Not in what we do now has to be called a modified triennial cycle. It is not the triennial cycle, because there actually is a halacha that you're not supposed to skip through the Torah, and we essentially skip through the Torah. So the original triennial cycle, you read the Torah from beginning to end in 3 years and sequentially. So just a detail. So tikra et ha-Torah hazot, you shall read, you shall recite this Torah. So he says, Hamelech haya koreh, that the king would read mitchilat Ela Hadvarim. He would read from the beginning of Ela Hadvarim, that's of course the book of Deuteronomy, kedeita b'mesechet Sota, as is in the tractate Sota. Al bima, on a podium, right, or a stage, shel eitz, of wood, shayu osin ba'azara, that they would erect in the temple courtyard. So this Torah could refer simply to the book of Deuteronomy, which makes a lot of sense, because you have to ask yourself, how could you read the Torah from Bereshit Bara until the end of the book of Deuteronomy? you couldn't do it. But I will
Which
tell
reminds
you,
me of the ring cycle,
yeah,
doing
yeah,
the whole Wagner.
la Havdil.
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
Yeah, that's one of the great musical ironies, a terrible musical irony. Yes. Okay. Onwards. And this is called HaK'heyl. This is this mitzvah that's mentioned in this particular unique mitzvah mentioned in this Torah portion. HaK'heyl et ha'am. Gather the people. A kahal means like a gathering,
An assembly.
Yeah, an assembly, exactly. So, for example, a makhela is the Hebrew word for choir because it's an assembly of singers. Okay, so gather this people, ha'anashim, the men, v'hanashim, the women, v'hataf, and the children, v'gercha asher b'sha'arecha, and the stranger who is within your gates. We've talked a little bit about that before. It is lovely, though, because these are people who are not born Jewish. Lema'an yishma'u, in order that they may hear, or lema'an yilmadu, and in order that they may learn, ve'yaru et Hashem Elokeichem. And I believe it means, and fear the Lord your God. And I think, we get, over the course of my rabbinate, I cannot count the number of people who have objected to this term fear. And the truth,
I have revere.
yeah, I
I
understand.
have fear.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Revere is a euphemism. It's a euphemism.
Or
Because the truth
awe, it's like,
I know,
but it's
again,
not just fear. It's not just
Okay.
being afraid. There's another aspect to fear.
Yes, but it is the level of concern, okay, that you should be worried, you should be afraid at a point where you are afraid to contravene the mitzvot. And the truth is, this generation is not God-fearing in the least. And that's why people are constantly doing things that go breaking Shabbat, breaking Kashrut, breaking a bunch of other things, because they have no fear. And because fear is a great motivator if it's in the right direction. We don't just speak of fear, but you can love God, but if you don't fear God, then that's not good. That's not a good thing.
I don't know if it's about they're not having fear. I think it's the root of not having fear is not having the belief that, you will have a certain punishment if you eat a ham sandwich or, write a letter on Shabbos.
So and again, I'm the way I understand these things, as I've tried to, deepen my understanding, excuse me, is to say that it's not like lightning bolt is going to come out of heaven and strike you. But what happens is slowly the moral fiber of the society starts to disintegrate. And I see it happening. I don't think I'm alone in that. But you see a move towards, a lack of any morality, any basis of decency. And that's what happens. And that's the dreadful thing that happens. That's the punishment. And things start unraveling. And things and people die and people get hurt, etc. And so, this is to speak of fear in the way that we are doing is, again, we don't recognize shorthand. And there's a way of trying to talk about very deep and sophisticated concepts, but to use shorthand in order to be able to express it. And shorthand's an important concept, but it doesn't stop us from studying this stuff and trying to gain a better understanding of what's happening. But the whole idea of, I look at my own marriage, okay? And I fear angering my wife. And I fear hurting her. I don't want to do it. And that goes along with whatever love I have for her. And you can say, in a way, that love is what generates a desire to do the positive commandments, and fear is what generates the avoidance of the negative commandments, of doing any negative, of not obeying a negative commandment. And
most of the negative commandments do deal with community and social contracts and things like that.
But many are individual too, though. Many are personal behavior. They do. But again, we think we own our bodies. Somehow, on what basis, I'm not sure we believe that. I didn't realize that we were involved in our own creation.
Like most of the Shabbat, the forbidden labors of Shabbat are negative commandments.
Indeed.
Yeah.
That's Shabbat the Malka. That's the Shabbat the queen, and the Shabbat HaK'heyl are the positive commandments of praying and studying and eating wonderful meals, etc. So that's why we talk about the Shabbat being both a bride and a queen. A royal bride is the Shabbat. And again, anyone who gets the Shabbat and understands it realizes how incredibly life enhancing it is, that it adds a dimension to one's existence as a human being that is such a gift. You just can't describe it. But if you don't get it, you see it as slavery. But again, Lauren, my favorite statement, ain't no one going to tell me what to do, right? You got to break through that to begin with. Okay, so I want to finish this verse, right? We just said, "V'yaru et Hashem Elokechem," and they will fear the Lord your God, "V'shamru la'asot," and they will guard to do et kol divrei haTorah azot, all the words of this Torah. I mean, look when this is said, and look how the understanding of and how much they understand human behavior. We've got to stop here. I didn't realize how late it had gotten, so I will stop here, and probably there's a Rashi on this, I'm gonna guess.
Yep.
All right, we will get to it. Okay, so we need to go here, and I'll see if I can get the little schmitzik to work, and I'll put the place in there. Let's see if I can do that. Yep, it's working. I wasn't able to get that to do that, so before. Okay, very good, right there. Stop the share and stop the recording. Thank you for those of you who have actually followed this recording to this point. Thank you.